The cold in Fog's End Regional Airport isn't just the mountain air. It's a deep, bone-chilling dread, thick with the scent of ozone and unanswered prayers. My name is Jace Merritt, an ex-pilot haunted by a voice from the sky, now a night supervisor at this forgotten hub. But this place, it has its own terrifying flight plan, governed by strange rules no one dares break. What's the spookiest place you've ever worked the night shift? Tell me in the comments below. And if you're ready to board a flight into true horror, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules and ring that bell. Because here, the terminal doesn't just hold planes, it holds souls. Prepare for takeoff. I came to Fog's End Regional Airport to run away from the sky. That's the simplest way to put it. When you're at 37,000 feet over Kansas and you hear a calm, clear voice whisper a flight correction in your headset. A voice that isn't from air traffic control, isn't your co-pilot, and certainly isn't in your head. You learn to appreciate the solid, unforgiving reliability of the ground. The voice saved us, corrected a trim imbalance seconds before a cascade failure. But it broke something in me. I resigned 2 weeks later, trading the endless blue for the suffocating quiet of the Appalachian Mountains. They gave me the night supervisor job at this forgotten airport, and a worn laminated card with 5 strange rules they called mountain protocols. If you see a pilot in an outdated uniform wandering the terminal, salute him and walk away. If the baggage carousel starts moving on its own, check the tags but never touch the black suitcases. If you hear the announcement for flight 666, cover your ears and do not look at the screens. If you see a suitcase moving on its own, let it pass. If a stranger in a pilot's uniform asks you for the time, answer, it's always midnight in the mountains. The terminal here is always cold, a deep, damp chill that sinks into your bones, even in the humid heart of summer. And the fog that rolls down off the peaks to swallow the runway has a strange metallic smell, like ozone and old, unanswered prayers. The last supervisor, a guy named Henderson, apparently just walked off the job a month ago, but I found his uniform cap sitting perfectly centered on the motionless baggage carousel, right next to a single, sleek, unmarked black suitcase. My name is Jace Merritt, and this was my first full week flying solo on the night shift. Fog's End wasn't much of an airport anymore. It was a relic, a half-shuttered testament to a time when coal was king and small mountain towns warranted their own runway. Now, it serviced only a few late-night cargo flights and the occasional red-eye for a budget airline, a skeletal operation kept alive by government subsidies. At night, the main terminal was a cavernous, echoing tomb, lit by buzzing fluorescent lights that cast everything in a sickly greenish pallor. The silence between the groans of the aging structure was so profound you could hear the dust settling. My staff consisted of 3 other souls adrift in the graveyard hours. Rena Caldwell, the late-night dispatcher, was the airport's anchor. She was a calm, competent woman in her late 30s with kind, tired eyes, who seemed to have worked here forever. She treated the airport's peculiarities with a placid acceptance, like they were just another line in a long-ignored employee handbook. You'll get used to the quiet, she told me on my first night, her voice a soothing murmur over the dispatch radio. The mountain likes to talk to itself sometimes. Then there was Tommy Griggs, the veteran baggage handler, a man whose good humor was directly proportional to the amount of whiskey in his flask. His face was a roadmap of busted capillaries, but his eyes were sharp. He moved with the slow, deliberate shuffle of a man who had learned long ago not to be in a hurry. He was the one who had pointed out Henderson's cap to me, his breath a fog of sour mash. The captain likes things neat, he'd slurred, before patting the black suitcase beside the cap. But he don't like people touching his passengers' luggage. And finally, there was Marcy, the late-night janitor, an eccentric woman who hummed old folk tunes and held lengthy, one-sided conversations with the vending machines. She saw omens in flickering lights and prophecies in the patterns of spilled coffee. She was the one who had laminated the rules card for me, her handwriting a flowery, looping script. I tried to dismiss the rules as the folksy, superstitious ramblings of an isolated, understaffed crew, a form of mountain hazing. But on my 3rd night, the first rule came for me. I was doing my final walkthrough of the main terminal. The last cargo flight had departed an hour ago. The silence was absolute. I was walking past the darkened ticketing counters for airlines that had gone bankrupt decades ago when I saw him. At the far end of the concourse, near the decommissioned Gate 3, a man stood silhouetted against the large plate glass window. He was tall, ramrod straight, and wearing a pilot's uniform. But it wasn't a modern uniform. It was the old style from the 1970s, with the sharp creases and the distinctive cap. I couldn't see his face clearly in the gloom, but I could feel his presence, a palpable aura of cold authority. He was just standing there, looking out at the fog-shrouded runway. My first instinct was to call out, to ask if he was with a charter flight I hadn't been informed of. But then I remembered the first rule. If you see a pilot in an outdated uniform wandering the terminal, salute him and walk away. It felt ridiculous. I was the supervisor. But something in his stillness, in the sheer wrongness of his presence in this empty, forgotten place, made me hesitate. The figure stopped his vigil of the runway and turned his head slowly towards me. Even from 50 yards away, I could feel the intensity of his gaze, though I couldn't see his eyes. He returned the salute, a crisp, perfect military gesture. Then he turned and took a single step, not towards the exit, but directly towards the solid cinder block wall beneath a faded welcome to Fog's End sign. And he walked right through it. He didn't fade or flicker. One moment, he was a solid silhouette. The next, he was simply gone. The air where he had been standing shimmered for a second, then grew intensely, bitingly cold. I stood frozen, the salute still half-formed, my heart hammering against my ribs. A crackle came from the walkie-talkie on my belt. It was Rena's voice, calm and even. "Good job on the walkthrough, Jace," she said, her tone giving nothing away. "The captain appreciates proper courtesy." The encounter with the captain left a residue of cold fear that I couldn't shake. I tried to file it away as a trick of the mind, a product of sleep deprivation and the oppressive, isolating atmosphere of the airport. But Rena's calm, knowing comment over the radio haunted me. It implied that this wasn't an anomaly. It was part of the routine. The rules weren't a prank. They were a procedure. A few nights later, I found Tommy Griggs in his natural habitat, the baggage handler's break room, which smelled of stale beer and old grievances. He was nursing a flask of cheap whiskey, his eyes fixed on the humming, motionless conveyor belt, visible through the grimy window. "He gave you a visit, did he?" Tommy asked without looking at me, his voice a low slur. "The captain?" I just nodded, my throat suddenly dry. "Yeah, he does that." Tommy sighed, taking a long pull from the flask. Tests the new blood. "Long as you show respect, he leaves you be. It's the other stuff you gotta worry about. The luggage." He gestured with his flask towards a dormant baggage carousel in the main terminal. "That's his real territory." He proceeded to tell me the legend, a story passed down through generations of Nightshift workers at Fog's End. He spoke of Flight 666, the one from the third rule, a flight that had vanished from the departure board and the sky back in the 70s. "They say the souls on that flight, they never landed," he whispered, his eyes distant. "And sometimes, their luggage comes back around, looking for its owners." He leaned closer, his boozy breath hot and sharp. "The black ones, Jace. The plain, black suitcases. That's them. The lost baggage. You can look, but you don't ever touch one. Touching one is like buying a ticket. And trust me, son, it's a one-way trip on an airline you don't want to fly." His words, steeped in alcohol and mountain folklore, should have been easy to dismiss. But later that night, as I was making my rounds, a low, groaning sound echoed through the empty terminal. It was the baggage carousel. It was the baggage carousel. Slowly, ponderously, it began to revolve, its old motor protesting with a sound like a dying man's last breath. And then from the dark, unseen portal where luggage was loaded, they began to appear. A dozen dusty, 1970s style suitcases, their vinyl sides scuffed, their handles cracked. And among them were 3 sleek, black ones, utterly devoid of any markings, their surfaces seeming to drink the dim fluorescent light. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Rule #2. Check the tags but never touch the black suitcases. I walked forward, my footsteps echoing unnaturally, and leaned over the moving carousel. I picked up the tag on a faded, floral-patterned suitcase. The paper was yellowed and brittle. The name read Doris Miller. The destination tag, however, made the hair on my arms stand on end. It didn't list a city. It read, The Sea of Tranquility. I checked another, a green Samsonite. Name, Robert Chen. Destination, The Void. A child's small, battered case. Destination, home. Each tag told a story of impossible journeys. I instinctively kept my hands far from the black suitcases, which glided past with a silent, ominous grace. The rest of the week was tense but quiet. The story might have ended there, a creepy tale to tell if I ever decided to rejoin the world of the living. But then Tommy had a bad night, a screaming fight over the phone with his estranged ex-wife, her words echoing through the cavernous baggage area. I saw him later, drunker than I'd ever seen him, his face a mask of maudlin self-pity. He was standing by the now motionless carousel, staring at one of the black suitcases that had never been cleared. "Is this it?" He yelled at the empty terminal, his voice cracking with emotion. "Is this what you want? Another lost soul?" Another lost soul. He stumbled forward and, with a defiant, sloppy gesture, laid his palm flat on the smooth black surface of the suitcase. "Take me then, you bastards. I got nowhere else to go." The air grew instantly cold. The air grew instantly cold. A deep silence fell over the terminal, swallowing his voice. Nothing happened. He just stood there for a moment, looking foolish and small, before shuffling off towards the break room. The next morning, the day shift supervisor called me. They had found Tommy. The main baggage conveyor belt, the one that carried luggage from the check-in counters down to the tarmac, had been activated sometime during the night. They found him tangled in the machinery, crushed by the powerful gears. It was a horrific, tragic accident, they said. But when I went down to the morgue to identify the body, I saw the small paper tag the coroner had tied to his wrist for identification, and on it, in what looked like Tommy's own shaky handwriting, was his destination. The crew. Tommy's accident changed everything. It ripped away the veil of folklore and pranks, exposing the raw, deadly reality beneath. This wasn't a haunted airport. It was a hunting ground. His death brought Deputy Ron Keller to my door. Keller was a man whose gruff by-the-book exterior barely concealed a deep-seated weariness. He was a creature of logic and procedure, and Fog's End, with its string of accidents and walk-offs over the years, was an affront to his worldview. "Another one, Merritt," he said, sipping coffee in my small, sterile office. "This place just eats people. You see anything last night?" Griggs seemed distraught. He was drunk. "Deputy," I said, choosing my words carefully. He and his ex-wife had a fight. I told him nothing of the black suitcase. He wouldn't believe me. And I couldn't shake the feeling that speaking too freely about the rules was a violation in itself. But we formed a reluctant, unspoken alliance. 2 men trying to find a logical pattern in a place that actively defied it. The fear sent me looking for answers. I sought out Marcy, the late-night janitor. I found her in the deserted food court, carefully wiping down the glass on a vending machine and humming an old, sad ballad. "He touched it, didn't he?" she said without looking at me. Poor Tommy. He knew the rules, but the sadness got too big for him. She sighed, her humming ceasing. "This place, it listens for that, for the sadness." She reached into her large cleaning cart and pulled out a rolled-up yellow tube. It was a set of the original airport blueprints from the 1950s. She unrolled it on a dusty table. "They built this whole place on top of an old Air Force black site from the war," she explained, her finger tracing a line. "A bomb shelter. See here, underneath what they now call Gate 3. She tapped the blueprint. That gate ain't gate. Look at the original designation. Scrawled in faint, spidery ink from a long-dead engineer was its true number. Gate 666. Its real number is the one they don't say out loud, she whispered. And the announcement, that ain't for passengers. That's a roll call. Her words were still echoing in my ears 2 nights later when it happened. I was in the main control tower, looking down at the fog-drenched runway, when the public address system crackled to life. A sound I hadn't heard since my orientation. A calm, automated female voice. The kind you hear in any modern airport filled the silence. Its message, however, was anything but modern. Flight 666, with final service to an undisclosed location, is now ready for boarding at Gate 3. The third rule. Cover your ears and do not look at the screens. My blood ran cold. I immediately clamped my hands hard over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. The voice repeated the announcement, serene and terrifying. The departure screens all over the terminal, which should have been dark, flared to life, their flickering, strobing light visible even through my clenched eyelids. I felt a gust of wind, a sudden powerful rush of displaced air, as if a massive crowd of people had sprinted past me in the silent tower. The air filled with the scent of ozone and faint, old-fashioned perfume. It was over in a matter of seconds. When I finally dared to open my eyes, the screens were dark again. The terminal was silent, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my soul, that I wasn't alone. I called out for Marcy on the radio. No answer. I ran down to the main terminal. The janitorial cart was standing in the middle of the concourse, a half-eaten bag of chips sitting on its tray. Marcy was gone. Later, Deputy Keller and I reviewed the security footage. The camera in the control tower showed me standing alone, hands clamped over my ears for what looked like a few seconds. But the time code at the bottom of the screen told a different story. It jumped from 2:59:58 directly to 3:61. 6 minutes of my life, of the airport's life, had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only an empty janitor's cart and a dead woman who, according to the coroner, had died peacefully in her sleep from a massive heart attack, found hours later in a supply closet. The disappearance of Marcy, filed away by the authorities as another tragic but explainable death, solidified my alliance with Deputy Keller. He still didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in patterns, and the pattern at Fog's End was screaming foul play. Together we dug into the old case files of every person who had vanished or died at the airport over the last 40 years. A chilling profile emerged. Loners, drifters, people with few family ties, all hired for the night shift. People who wouldn't be missed. People like Tommy, people like Marcy, people like me. Rena was a source of quiet, sad confirmation. This place has always had a reputation, she told me, her voice heavy with feigned sorrow. It attracts lost souls, Jace. It's a sad truth. The hauntings grew bolder, more personal. But one night, while patrolling the deserted B-wing of the terminal, I saw it. A single sleek black suitcase, identical to the ones from the carousel, slid out from behind a row of ticketing kiosks. It didn't roll. It glided over the linoleum floor, silent and deliberate, moving down the center of the hall on its own. Rule #4. If you see a suitcase moving on its own, let it pass. I flattened myself into a darkened doorway, my heart hammering, and watched as the suitcase glided past, turning a corner and heading for a service elevator. Moments later, Keller arrived, responding to a text I'd sent him about a flickering light in the B-wing. I told him what I'd seen. He scoffed, a weary, frustrated sound. A remote-controlled suitcase, Merritt? That's what we've come to? A prank? Hank? He refused to listen to my warnings. I'm going to find your prankster. He took the stairs, determined to intercept the suitcase on the lower level. He never came back up. We found his locked patrol car 2 days later. It was parked neatly inside Hangar 4, a derelict building at the far end of the airfield that had been welded shut since the 1980s. There was no sign of forced entry. The keys were still in the ignition. His disappearance broke something in me. I was alone now. Truly alone. That night, Rena found me in the dispatch office, my head in my hands. "The power's out in the west corridor. Jace," she said, her voice soft with sympathy. "The breaker keeps tripping. Can you come take a look?" Numbly, I followed her. She led me down the dark, echoing corridor, her flashlight beam a small, comforting circle in the oppressive gloom. We rounded a corner, and there he was, the captain, standing not 20 feet away, as solid and real as the concrete floor beneath him. He was waiting for me. Rena let out a small, theatrical gasp and stepped back, leaving me exposed. My blood ran cold. It was a trap. The spectral pilot took a step forward, his form radiating an almost unbearable cold. He stopped, his shadowed face and melted goggles fixed on me. And then he spoke, his voice a low, gravelly baritone, like a radio transmission from a bygone age. "Son," he asked, the word echoing in the silence. "Do you have the time?" Rule #5, the final test. My mind raced, my heart pounding a deafening rhythm. I remembered the words, the strange, nonsensical phrase that was my only defense. It's always midnight in the mountains," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. The captain stood motionless for a long moment. Then he nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture of acknowledgement, and he faded, not walking away, but dissolving into the shadows, leaving only a profound, lingering chill in the air. I turned, my legs shaking, and looked at Rena. The feigned terror was gone from her face. In its place, for a split second before she could school her features back into a mask of concern, was a look of sharp, undeniable disappointment. The power outage had been a lie. The entire scenario had been a setup. She hadn't been leading me to a faulty breaker. She'd been leading me to an execution. The look of profound disappointment on Rena's face lasted only for a fraction of a second. But it was as damning and illuminating as a flash of lightning in a dark room. The mask of the concerned, compassionate coworker slid back into place almost instantly. But the image was seared into my brain. The soft sympathy in her eyes was replaced by a look of sharp, calculated assessment. She hadn't been afraid for me. She had been afraid I would fail the test. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. Every kind word, every shared coffee, every moment of commiseration over the airport's quirks had been a lie, a performance. "He's gone," she whispered, her voice a practiced imitation of relief, rushing to my side. "Jace, are you all right?" I was so scared. I pushed her hand away, my own hands trembling with a mixture of adrenaline and white-hot fury. "The power, Rena," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "It never went out, did it?" She flinched, her composure finally cracking for real. Her eyes, which I had always thought of as kind, now seemed to hold a deep, ancient sorrow, a weariness that went far beyond long night shifts. "Jace," she began. "You don't understand." "Oh, I'm starting to," I countered, my voice rising, echoing in the cold, silent corridor. "I'm starting to understand everything. Tommy, Marcy, Deputy Keller, they weren't accidents, were they? They were recruitments. And you were the goddamn recruiting officer." Tears began to well in her eyes, but they weren't tears of manipulation. They were real, born of a grief so old, it seemed to have hollowed her out from the inside. "I didn't want this," she choked out, her carefully constructed facade crumbling to dust. "I never wanted any of this. I didn't let up. I was a pilot again, cross-examining a faulty system, demanding answers. What are you, Rena? A ghost? A ghoul? What the hell are you?" She sank to the floor, her back against the cold cinder block wall, and wrapped her arms around her knees, looking suddenly small and fragile. "I'm a passenger," she whispered to the floor. "The first one or the last one? I don't know anymore." She began to talk, the story pouring out of her in a torrent of long-suppressed memory and guilt. She told me about Flight 666, not as a legend, but as a memory. She had been on that plane, a 7-year-old girl named Katerina, flying with her parents. She remembered the strange, humming equipment in the cargo hold, the men in military uniforms who weren't on the passenger manifest. She remembered the pilot, Captain Evan Hayes, a kind man who had let her see the cockpit before the flight. She remembered the moment the experiment went wrong. A flash of blinding white light, a sound that was the absence of all sound, and a feeling of being simultaneously frozen and torn apart. "Oh, they found me at the crash site," she said, her voice a dead monotone. "In 1998. The plane went down in 72. For 26 years I was just there, in the wreckage. Still 7 years old. I hadn't aged a day. The shadowy government agency behind the experiment, the ones who had been monitoring the site, took her. They couldn't explain what had happened. They buried the story, erased her past, and gave her a new name, Rena Caldwell. They placed her with a local family with ties to the airport, a family sworn to secrecy. She grew up here, feeling a constant, inexplicable pull to the desolate terminal, eventually taking the dispatcher job as if it were a birthright. I didn't remember any of it," she sobbed. "Not for years. It was just a big black hole in my childhood. But the airport, it helped me remember. The captain, he talks to me. In my dreams. He's just trying to get his crew back. He's just trying to finish the flight to get everyone home. He doesn't understand that home is gone." "So you helped him," I stated, the horror of it settling on me like a physical weight. "You helped him collect a new crew." "I guide them. Collect a new crew," she insisted, looking up at me, her face a mess of tears and desperation. "I only choose the ones who are already lost, Jace. The lonely ones, the sad ones." Tommy, his heart was broken. Marcy, she wanted to believe in something more. Keller, he was so afraid of the sky. He was already grounded. I was giving them a place to belong, a purpose. It was the most twisted, insane justification I had ever heard. She wasn't a monster. She was something far more tragic, a victim who had become a willing accomplice, her survivor's guilt weaponized by a ghost. "And me, Rena?" I asked, my voice cold. "What about me? Am I lost enough for you?" Her face crumpled. "The crew is almost full," she whispered, her words barely audible. "Tommy is the new baggage master. Marcy is the flight attendant. Keller, with his knowledge of maps and routes, he's the navigator." She looked at me, her eyes filled with terrible dawning horror, as if she was only just now realizing the final implication of her own actions. "But the last flight, it had 2 pilots, the captain and his first officer." Officer, the voice you heard in the sky. Jace, the one that saved you. That was him, trying to recruit you, trying to guide you here. The final position on the crew, it was always meant for you. As the full weight of her confession settled in the air between us, the PA system throughout the entire airport crackled to life. It wasn't the calm, automated female voice this time. It was the deep, gravelly baritone of the captain himself, amplified, echoing, and filled with a cold final authority. "Flight 666, all crew and passengers, prepare for final boarding. The manifest is complete. Final destination, departure immediate." The lights in the entire terminal went out, plunging us into absolute, suffocating darkness. The heavy steel shutters over the main entrances slammed down with the percussive, deafening finality of a row of guillotine blades. The final boarding call had been made. We were locked in, and the ghost of Flight 666 was finally ready for takeoff. The darkness that swallowed the terminal was absolute, a physical presence that was colder and heavier than the mountain fog. The only light was the thin, panicked beam of my flashlight. Rena was a crumpled heap on the floor, sobbing, not from fear, but from the crushing weight of her own long-buried sins, now laid bare. The captain's voice had been a final judgment, and she had been found wanting. The air vibrated with a low, powerful hum, the sound of a phantom engine spooling up, a sound that seemed to come from the very foundations of the airport. "He's coming for you, Jace," she whispered, her voice ragged. "It's too late. It's never too late," I said. The words of a pilot, an echo from a life I thought I'd left behind. My mind was racing, sifting through the impossible details, searching for a flaw in the system, a checklist for a nightmare. The ghosts were powerful, but they were bound by rules. The salute, the phrase for the time. Not touching the luggage. They were procedures. And every procedure has a purpose. "The shelter," I said, grabbing Rena's arm and hauling her to her feet. Marcy showed me the blueprints. "Under gate 3. She said the ghosts don't go there. It's a tomb," Rena choked out. "That's where they kept the equipment." "Then that's where we're going," I said, pulling her along. We ran through the darkened, echoing terminal. The air was filled with whispers now, a chorus of disembodied voices calling my name. I saw them at the edges of my flashlight beam, the shimmering, translucent forms of the passengers, standing by the gates, their faces pale and expectant. Then I saw Tommy Griggs, standing behind the baggage check-in counter, a spectral luggage tag held in his hand, his eyes sad and empty. I saw Deputy Keller, standing by a map of the United States, his form wavering as he made phantom calculations. The new crew was assembling. We reached gate 3, just as the captain materialized at the far end of the concourse. A tall, authoritative silhouette, radiating an aura of immense code. He wasn't moving quickly. He didn't need to. He knew where we were going. The entrance to the bomb shelter was hidden behind a loose panel in the wall of a janitor's closet, just as Marcy's blueprints had shown. It was a heavy, circular steel hatch, like on a submarine, with a large wheel for a handle. It took both mine and Rena's strength to turn it, the metal groaning in protest after decades of disuse. We scrambled inside, into a cramped, descending stairwell, and spun the wheel again, sealing the heavy door just as we heard the slow, deliberate footsteps of the captain stop on the other side. The shelter was a time capsule from the Cold War. It was a cramped, bunker-like monitoring station, filled with banks of obsolete, reel-to-reel tape machines, oscilloscopes, and a thick, suffocating layer of dust. This was the black site. This was where the experiment on Flight 666 had been managed. "They were trying to bend space," Rena whispered, her eyes wide as she looked at the faded schematics on the wall. "Not time travel, but relocation. A way to move personnel and equipment from one point to another instantaneously. A temporal shortcut through the mountains. And Flight 666 was the test flight," I finished, my light landing on a row of metal canisters on a shelf. They were labeled with a stenciled military designation and a date from 1972. Flight 666, flight recorder, the black box, or boxes. This was the one place the ghosts couldn't enter, I realized, because this was their tomb. This room held the last, tangible record of their final agonizing moments. The data was the anchor, and the anchor was here. We threaded the brittle magnetic tape from the first canister onto one of the old machines. With a click and a whir, the speakers crackled to life. We heard the voice of Captain Evan Hayes, calm, professional, running through his pre-flight checklist. We heard the scientists on the ground, their voices tinny, talking about stabilizing the geometric and achieving field resonance. We heard the low, powerful hum of the experimental device in the cargo hold spinning up. Then we heard the moment it all went wrong. A scientist on the ground yelling, "The field is collapsing. Shut it down." Captain Hayes' voice suddenly tight with alarm. "We've lost flight controls. We are in an uncontrolled descent." Then the screaming, the sounds of tearing metal, and through it all, the captain's last, defiant, heartbreaking words. Not to his crew, not to the ground, but to his passengers. Brace for impact. Stay in your seats. I will get you home. I promise, I will get you home. The tape ended in a burst of static. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a demon. He was just a pilot. A good pilot, bound by an oath he had made in the last seconds of his life. An oath so powerful, it had torn a hole in reality. He was trapped, forever trying to complete his last order, to fulfill his final, impossible promise. The silence in the bunker after the tape ended was heavier than any haunting. Rena was weeping silently, not for herself, but for the man she only vaguely remembered, the pilot who had tried to save her. "He can't go home," she whispered. "There's no home to go to. He's just stuck." But I knew she was wrong. A pilot's last order is absolute, until it is superseded by a new one from a higher authority. Until it is superseded by a new one from a higher authority. The heavy steel door of the bunker began to groan, the metal buckling inwards under an immense, unseen pressure. The captain's promise was so strong, it was now overriding the sanctuary of this room. He was coming for his co-pilot. "There's only one way this ends," I said, my mind clear for the first time in weeks. I knew what I had to do. I grabbed the PA microphone from the bunker's old communication console and hot-wired it into the airport's main system, a trick I'd learned in my Air Force days. "Jace, no!" Rena cried, grabbing my arm. "You can't. He'll take you." "He's not taking me," I said, my voice calm, authoritative, the voice of a captain. "I'm relieving him of his command." The door burst open. The captain stood there, filling the doorway, a figure of immense sorrow and power. The ghosts of his crew, of Tommy and Marcy and Keller, shimmered behind him. He looked at me, and I felt his overwhelming sense of duty, of failure, of being so close to fulfilling his promise. Rena, in a final desperate act of atonement, threw herself in front of me. "Take me," she screamed at the captain. "I was on the manifest. I'm one of yours. Let him go." The captain looked at her, a flicker of recognition, of confusion, in his spectral form. But I stepped forward, gently moving Rena aside. I looked him right in his shadowy, goggled eyes. I didn't see a monster. I saw a fellow pilot, trapped in the worst kind of emergency. I brought the microphone to my lips. My voice, amplified, boomed through the bunker, through the terminal, through the very air of the mountains. It was no longer the voice of Jace Merritt, the broken night watchman. It was the voice of command. "This is the tower. Acknowledged flight 666. The captain froze. The entire spectral host grew still, listening. "Captain Evan Hayes," I continued, my voice clear and steady. "Your dedication to your passengers and crew is commendable. You have faced extreme conditions with honor, but your flight plan has been amended. Your original destination is no longer available." I paused, letting the words sink into the charged silence. "You and your crew have been rerouted. Your new destination is approved and waiting. You are cleared for final approach. You are cleared to proceed." "Captain Hayes, you are cleared to go home." I gave him a slow, perfect pilot's salute. For a long moment, the world held its breath. The captain looked at me, and through the shadows and the spectral energy, I felt a wave of something ancient and powerful, relief. His duty was fulfilled. A new, superseding order had been given. He slowly, crisply, returned the salute. He turned to his crew. He nodded. And then, as one, they all turned and walked, not back into the terminal, but through the solid rock wall of the bunker, towards their spectral runway, towards their final piece. The low hum of the engines faded. The whispers ceased. The oppressive cold vanished, replaced by the simple, clean chill of a mountain morning beginning to dawn. The haunting of fog's end was over. In the sudden, absolute silence, Rena Caldwell looked at me, a lifetime of gratitude in her eyes. Then she sighed, a soft, peaceful sound. The psychic tether that had frozen her in time was broken. The 50 years she had been spared came for her all at once. Her face softened, her dark hair grayed at the temples, and she aged before my eyes, not with horror, but with a gentle grace. She smiled, a true, peaceful smile, and then collapsed, her ordeal finally over. I was the only one left. I walked out of the bunker and into the main terminal as the first rays of the sun streamed through the dusty windows. I had saved the airport, but my own ghosts were not so easily dismissed. The voice I had heard in the cockpit all those years ago, I knew now who it was. The captain reaching across time and space trying to find his replacement. The airport never reopened. The airport never reopened. They sealed it up, another forgotten relic in the heart of the mountains. But I never left. I couldn't. I am the guardian of its story, the keeper of its silence. I am the eternal night supervisor of Fog's End. Years have passed, I don't know how many. I sit in the old dispatch office watching the fog roll in. Most nights are quiet. But sometimes, a new recruit for a surveying company will wander in. A lost soul looking for a job, drawn by forces they don't understand. I greet them calmly, and I hand them a single worn laminated card. On it, there is now only one rule. If a stranger in a pilot's uniform asks you for the time, tell him he is clear to go home. The air in Fog's End has been cleared, but the echoes of Flight 666 will forever resonate. Jace Merritt learned that some promises cut deeper than any blade, and that true duty knows no end. The captain's flight found its final destination, but the journey is far from over. Seriously, if you didn't watch until the very end, you missed the captain's ultimate purpose and the chilling twist of the new final rule that binds the survivor. The true ending reveals a new kind of haunting. What do you think of the captain's desperate oath? What was Rena's real role in all of this? Share your theories in the comments below. And if you made it through this shift at Fog's End, if the mountains haven't claimed you, then you're one of the few who truly understands. Subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules, because out here, some flights never truly land. They just wait for their next crew.